right, hello and welcome to Spring Office Hours, episode number 55, Spring Modulith with Oliver Drotbohm. All right, we're going to have some fun today. DaShaun, this is going to be a fun little conversation. If you're just joining the show, my name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at VMware. With me, as always, my good friend DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing?
I'm here, and today is a great day for many, many reasons. We just got done doing the Spring One virtual tour, and yeah, we have an exciting show, one that we've actually talked about. This is a project we've talked
Yeah.
about a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think for everybody involved, this is going to be a great one.
Yeah, that was what an awesome day today. So if you didn't have a chance to check out the Spring One virtual tour, there are going to be replays of it over on the Spring Developer YouTube channel. So check that out. There were so many great talks today. I know this because I got to MC some of it. So I was sitting in there watching one talk and then looking over to see what else was going on. So many great talks. So I can't wait to catch the replay myself. So that should be a lot of fun. What else you got going on? We're doing a little traveling this week, aren't we?
We are, but I'm thinking, hey guys, thank you so much for this. I'm hearing the sound is wrong and there's an echo. But oh wait, now it's fine. Okay, wonderful. Sorry
Huh?
about that.
Oh.
Thanks for letting us know. We want to know. Like you got to help us out. So
I
thanks.
don't
But
know
we
why
are.
the sound. I don't know why the sound would be wrong. But
We're
all
getting
right.
ready to travel. Where are we going?
Yeah,
We're going
we
all
are
over the
going to
place. We
Seattle.
always do.
But this
Someplace
week
near
we're
you.
in Seattle. We're gonna have some fun. We're gonna talk to some customers about everything spring. So that's always a good thing. I'm excited about that. So cool. Yeah, I think maybe with that we'll just get into it. I would just want to do a little backstory on this. So if you go over, for everyone joining us in the live stream, thank you. If you have your questions, go ahead and put them in. We'll see if we can't get to them. Again, as DaShaun always says, if you come over his house and don't eat, that's your problem. So if you're here, ask your questions. We'll see if we can't answer them or we can't see if our esteemed guest can help us answer them. But if you're not on the live chat and you're on the podcast, head over to springofficehours.io and take a look at all the past episodes that we've done. There's a little bit of a theme going on here over the last couple months. I've done some videos on the YouTube channel. We've done some shows here on Spring Office Hours all around kind of architecture, right? Like the idea is you go to start.spring.io. That Spring Initializer is great. Like it helped you kind of bootstrap your application. You open it up in an ID and then you go,
Now what?
what's next? What do I do now? And and one of the things I love about Spring is it doesn't hold your hand. Like, hey, you can pretty much do whatever you want, which is good. I mean, you could build the next great SaaS or you could shoot yourself in the foot. It doesn't matter what you want to do, right? So we've had some content around this. We talked about, structuring your applications. We talked to Ted. We had Ted on a couple weeks ago as a special guest and talked about kind of testing and hexagonal architecture. And so we've kind of had this theme going on. And I want to kind of bring it full circle here with our guest today. So with that, I'm going to bring in Ollie and let him kind of introduce himself. Ollie, the Spring Modulith project lead. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. It's pretty late here in Germany, but yeah, I'm still up and running for today. And
Awesome.
thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much for coming on. Like DaShaun said, this is a show that we've wanted to do for a while. We've been talking about Spring Modulith as a project for a while, and yeah, it just hit 1.0 not too long ago, right?
At Spring One, actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
when we talked about when we're going to fit in this episode, like in all our calendars.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we get into some of the Spring Modulith stuff, I just wanted to talk a little bit about you in case there's someone out there who doesn't know Ollie. But if you want to kind of give us a backstory on you and what you do, what keeps you up at night, what are you thinking about all the time?
So the backstory, like behind me at VMware on the Spring team, is that I've been working at a company in Germany building Spring applications primarily for quite a while, over 13 years ago. And I started building an extension to Spring back in the days that picked up on an idea of like a couple of other folks, but productized this into what's now known as Spring Data. So there was a predecessor of, or at least the repository abstraction. That was something that I built in at this other company in Karlsruhe, Germany. And I got in touch with the German subsidiary of SpringSource back in the days, and started in 2010 as a consultant. So I've been traveling mostly Central Europe, helping people build Spring applications. And I took the project with me. And back then, Spring data lead Mark Pollack at some point was kind of asking me, do you think what you have there could become a part of Spring Data? And then there's been a weekend where we basically ported the project over. It was solidly built for JPA back in the days, and we split apart the non-JPA parts from the JPA ones, and then on top of the non-JPA ones, we built the Spring Data MongoDB repository abstraction. So we're kind of taking this for a spin and seeing whether that would work for other stores, and that's been in 2011 or something. And I guess I think we're now the second most downloaded, like if you take boot and framework out of the picture, because they're literally the foundation of everything, there's Spring Security coming next, and understandably as well. But then it's Spring Data JPA running on second, third, fourth, whatever you want to, however you want to count it. But it's become a pretty popular project, and so I've done this for quite a while. And what's probably interesting about it is that I've never been like strongly interested in building like sophisticated data access for a particular data store. It's been more the idea of there is this repository concept which is a concept like coined in the domain-driven design, the Blue Book from Eric Evans. And it's been the idea that you have this kind of pattern and it has some architectural role in your application. And we're providing a programming model for how to implement that architectural pattern inside your application. And Spring as a technology is a great foundation to build these kind of abstractions, because for one, it's like it provides like a lot of technical help with proxying and transactions and what have you out of the box, but it's also very customizable. It itself has some kind of not a strong view on architectural elements, but just the presence of the stereotype annotations like controller, service, repository. It already kind of hints at like, okay, it's interested in the layering because it attaches like technical functionality to the individual layers. So there is some kind of attitude towards that, while not necessarily like fully, like not fully embrace is probably the wrong word, but it's kind of you can grab these things. You can make like all of your Spring Beans components, right? So if you're not interested in these stereotyping stuff, then that's fine. And also Boot takes this kind of forward in terms of attaching their test support for data enable, what is it, data JPA tests or whatever. It's also attaching to the technical layering. And I mean, there is general recommendations, right? You would definitely accept that a controller would want to use a service and the service would want to use a repository. So there is some kind of unspoken, accepted kind of guideline. I don't know.
Like don't wear white after Labor Day.
Yeah, sure. So there is something in there, but it's not necessarily enforced, and it's not taken to some additional like, or it's not a first-class citizen, something you have to follow. If you can freely ignore that if you want. But coming back to the original story, my interest has always been like, okay, how do you express architectural concepts in code, and how does that help to build you more maintainable applications, well-structured applications that are easy to maintain, also for like people joining a team and them needing to find out like where things are, how to move around the code base, and how to change the code in a way that they can maybe add new features easily or what have you. That's kind of the overall picture.
So I'm curious, a couple things to unpack from that. One is like, all right, you're working on Spring Data for a while. At what point do you start like kind of raising your hand going, hey, I know we're working on this thing over here, but I'm really interested in this thing and I want to start like pursuing that a little bit more. When does that happen?
I mean, in the Spring team, we're fortunate enough to not be like boxed into like, here's the thing you're supposed to work on, and then that's
Right.
what you do like all of the time. I hardly know anyone on the engineering team who's solely working on a single
Yeah.
thing. Or like a bit of boot, a bit of framework, and there's of course
Mhm.
like core teams. I'm still working officially for the Spring Data team. I'm spending
Yep.
quite a bit of time on like Spring Data Commons and or just helping other team members to understand why stuff has been for 10 years then the way it has been right now. But so the general interest was like there at day one, and then there was also my consulting work in the first 1.5 years. So I've been like exposed to customer projects. I've given a talk that basically advises on what Spring Modulith now kind of helps you build in 2011-12 already. So I've always done this kind of stuff. Also because like I'm like focusing on the German or Central European market, mostly because I'm speaking at conferences here, seen by people here, and then get approached by them to, can you help us have a look at this piece of Spring code or what have you. So I've always tried to stay in touch with like customers actually building Spring applications for the sole reason that whatever they do with the framework or the ecosystem, it's probably interesting to hear about this because that's the best way to get like feedback and requirements engineering or do
Right.
requirements engineering some way. But because people open tickets, but this is just a tiny fraction of our overall users, and then
Yep.
getting in front of customers or having them show me what they do with applications helps to get a feel for where we need to move the projects, right? There's whether they're trying something's very hard to achieve, or they do something that they build on top of Spring, and it would be interesting to support that out of the box, or make
Yep.
this like an accepted pattern or something like that. So that's kind of the spirit that always drove me, and that I was lucky enough by all of my managers that I've had during my time at VMware that they were kind of fine with that, and often like even encouraged me to do that. That's kind of
Yeah,
You bring
that's
up a
great, and
couple
it's
things.
probably why we attract and retain so much great talent here. So
yeah.
For me, you talked about the patterns, the accepted patterns inside of the organization. So for me, my brain, it kind of lines up these things. Hey, our organization does this pattern. We do CRUD rest, and we're doing that. And a lot of times, we talked already about start@spring.io. You don't get a whole lot of code examples in there. So then this concept of accelerator came along, Mark Pollock, and what he was doing. This is great. So hey, here's our pattern. Here's what we're doing, and maybe we have some code. We have an example to go a little step further, and then we're kind of keep on going. What's next? This idea of not only the patterns, but making them available, being able to add them, and start quickly. So this is kind of where my head goes when I think about.
There's definitely truth to that. There's like been like if let's say move on from the early 2010s or what have you to the last like 5 years or so. There's been like two major things that drove basically my development and which ultimately resulted in the new project. One is like the rise of microservices or application architectures that are primarily focused on distribution, right? So you build multiple systems to comprise an overall system. And the question of why do teams do that? What goals do they want to achieve? And whether you strictly need distribution to achieve these goals. That was one question. And the other one was that companies often have the urge to produce so-called reference architectures. So they want to have some kind of blueprints or guidelines for how an application is supposed to be set up, structured, when they start new projects or what have you. So there was like the like a request for guidance on what to do with Spring, and we've actually also given that guidance. I mean, if you just watch like tons of these Spring One presentations, the Spring One tour presentations, there's always been verbally communicated recommendations on, oh, you should probably use constructor injection. You should put your configuration classes that way. Recently, I've even convinced Josh to promote like using package scope more. These kinds of things that are like have been verbally communicated. They've been communicated in consulting engagements. So if you basically talk to us or worked with us on in a support fashion, in a consulting fashion, then you've got these recommendations. But it's never been like necessarily codified, or those recommendations have not been codified in a way that you would just basically get them when you build an application. It's kind of
Yeah.
probably a bit vague, but we're going to get there, I guess, in a couple of
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah. So we'll get into Spring Modulith in a second. I just want to touch on one more thing, because your story is, I'm hearing this a lot lately. We had fortunately got to sit down with Spencer Gibb when we were in Detroit. And it was funny. His story was, hey, I was working on this thing. Someone at VMware, well, it wasn't VMware at the time. It was Pivotal probably at that time. Someone at Pivotal saw this thing that I was working on and then brought me on board to like continue working on this thing. And I'm hearing a similar story from you. Hey, I'm working on this repository pattern. Somebody sees my work and kind of brings me in. I'm just wondering if you have like any advice for those, because most people might want to just say, hey, I got to build this resume and then apply for that job. And then the stories that I'm hearing is build in public, talk about the things that you're doing at your current job. If you want to move up, that's probably a really good pattern to kind of getting where you want to go, right?
Sure. I mean, that's when I started the Spring Data team, I was kind of I think the second or third person after Mark and Thomas Risberg. I think Kostin was still with us, Kostin Lau, now at Elasticsearch. But when I took over the project as a project lead, then I started to build like a team around it. And we've always hired from the community, right? So Christoph Strobe, like now maintainer of MongoDB, Redis, and all things native in Spring Data. He worked on a Spring Data Solar project outside of the company. And that was the reason when we were looking for someone to work on data related stuff, I mean, it's kind of like you look at the people who contribute. It doesn't always work out, but it's definitely something that I'd recommend if you like think about wanting to work for us, because I mean there's no better way we can interact before the job basically and get to know each other, find out whether working together works fine, and you like people from the outside also get an impression how we work and what it would be to work with us. I mean, especially because we're all distributed anyway, a lot of the processes are already set up that it doesn't make a big difference whether you're kind of external to the team or internal, except the fact that you probably, if you join the team, you have like more time to spend on that piece of software. But like the processes don't really change that much. Internal versus external. That's kind of
cool. So getting into kind of architecture, I've done a video, I've done a couple of videos lately on kind of the point, we talked about at the top of the show. You build, you create a new project at start.spring.io, you're dropped into this project, and now what do you do? Because you have the freedom to kind of do whatever you want to do. And, for the longest time, you just mentioned you have been encouraging Josh to use more of a package kind of code architecture, right? So for the longest time, I know you've talked about this too, is we see a lot of projects out there that are organized by layer. And by layer, I mean, hey, we're putting our web code in a web package. We're putting our repositories or our data abstraction in some type of package layer there. And we have talked about it at length, but in your opinion, kind of what are the cons against using that approach?
So there's nothing wrong with like having technical layering any kind of technical structuring at some level of your code decomposition strategy, right?
Hmm.
What I think is a bit misguided is to necessarily, I understand where it's coming from, but it's a bit misguided, is to immediately start using Java packages to establish that kind of structure, because
Hmm.
packages are means of encapsulation. And whenever it comes to technical structure, it's completely orthogonal to encapsulation, right? Because you want
Hmm.
to keep your controller with your service, with your repository. And if you tear them apart, then you have all the interesting relationships crossing those package boundaries, which means
Hmm.
you totally give up on the encapsulation feature of them. Why you can argue that's just fine. I don't care, right? Because like if I create a new class in my IDE, then it's public anyway. So, which is a like a another thing we could talk about why that.
Yep. Yep.
But zooming out a bit again, it's like, okay, what is our, let's say, functional architecture supposed to achieve? It's supporting the business, right? It's kind of we build software to support the business, to evolve with the business, which means that we will very likely see new business related feature requests coming in through the life cycle of the application. We will less often see a request coming in that says, "Oh, let's exchange our relational persistence built with Hibernate with, let's say, MongoDB," right, or something like that. It's not like, I'm not saying it's like black or white, but the
Yep.
one is more likely than the other. And I would want to optimize to support the more likely changes than the not so likely changes. That's why I'm kind of like have been focusing on, okay, what can we do to actually express the functional decomposition that we've planned on our whiteboard in our event storming session or what have you, that we eventually got to modeling our application, and how we can actually translate that into the physical arrangement of our code base. That's kind of the fundamental question. And building microservices is actually one expression of that, right? You could
Hmm.
say, okay, I have my order management, I have my inventory, and I want to build those as two separate systems for whatever reasons, organizational reasons, because I have teams, separate teams for that, and I don't want them to kind of step on each other's toes. It could also have technical reasons like scalability, but at the same time, you could just come to the conclusion, hey, we just like build one thing for now,
Yep.
and have like three different logical functional modules in there. And the same way you would want to align your, let's say, microservices with the functional domain,
Right.
why would you not do that in a monolithic system as a first level measure? Each of the modules could then have internal structure like layering or an hexagonal arrangement with ports and adapters or onion architecture or what have you. But
Yep.
it's a second level concern. That's what I'm trying to get to,
It
really.
it seems so obvious when you say it like that, but then the question then kind of comes in, like, why have we been doing it this way for so long? Is it just does it come from like the Ruby on Rails days where like we packaged our applications like this and it kind of spread, or
We
is it
didn't do
just
Ruby on
something that?
Rails. Never touched the stuff.
No,
I,
I mean we didn't, but I mean it was a reason part of the web kind of exploded, right? With building kind of fast applications, and I think Spring MVC was part of that kind of wave, right? So I think I, pieces are pulled from every kind of community, if you will.
I guess I have two primary aspects why I think this is so predominant. One is we're kind of used to putting files in folders, right? So that's kind of like one thing. And we put all the images in one folder, but we
Great
put
point.
all the MP3s into a different folder. That's kind of we're just used to doing that. The other thing is that a lot of literature and scientific literature, the university curriculums, they have a much easier time to analyze software systems if they throw out the domain entirely, right? They can just like look at the technical structure, because then you could literally have an e-commerce system or a system for some power plant, and it could still have a layered architecture, right? So it's the same. It's the same pattern. We recognize a pattern, and then we're inclined to repeat that, and that's what's then kind of made it into books, and that's what made it into universities, and then everyone is kind of
Yep.
familiar with layered architecture. I mean, you can ask a second semester student about this, and they would probably know that. So they come
Yeah.
into their jobs, and then they find, oh, what's the first thing they know? Oh, it's that, right? Because it can be taken from project to project to project, and it's all the same. And we're kind of, I mean, as human beings, we're kind of, oh, here's the thing we know, we're familiar with, so we try that
Yeah.
first. And everything domain related is, for one, complicated, and a second one, specific, right? You'd have to kind of think about it from your particular team, company you're working on. Is it banking? Is it insurance? Is it what have you? So you actually have to think this through first. And it's not that you can start with something right after you basically created the project on start.spring.io. So there's an entry barrier to some degree to use a different kind of scheme, but in the long run, it's actually worth it, I think, because you actually create more maintainable software, which
Yep.
I love that. Right.
yeah.
So I have a little use case, this package by layer, and then we find out, hey, we have these common DTOs, for example, and we pull those into a common library, and then they become public classes. But now we're trying to upgrade. Now we're trying to upgrade to the latest version of Java, and we're trying to upgrade to Spring Boot 3.1, and we're finding that where we thought we were getting this benefit, we're actually now stuck because there's so many people using that common library that we can't upgrade and we can't keep things consistent. So we've kind of thought that we were getting this advantage, and now it's actually become more difficult for them to upgrade.
Yeah. And an analogy that I started to like quite a bit is that packaging by technical aspect is like, assuming you're flat or you're in your house, you would put all the chairs in one room and all the tables in another. And that's not very useful, right? Because you need to use the table with the chair. So you need to
That's
put
really
the
good.
stuff together that you would want to use together.
Yeah.
Counterexample, like clothing, right? You're not like putting a suit in a closet, right? You have your like t-shirts and socks and whatnot, because you're taking them and recombine them all the time. But that's not what we do with controllers and services and repositories, because we establish an arrangement and then we use that to our benefit, similar to the way we arrange furniture in a room. So I'm not sure that fully is
Yeah.
like
I love
correct.
it. I'm using it from now on. So whoever gave that metaphor to you, tell them thanks, because that one firmly.
Yeah,
in my
I'm
back
gonna
pocket.
stick that one in the back pocket. So yeah, and it's the funny thing is, if you move from like some kind of package by layer to like a package by feature, now you start to think about all of the things that go into writing Java code too. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't make everything public, because we were taught back when we learned Java that like not everything needs to be public, right? But as soon as we got to building web applications, it's like, oh, just make everything public, because like you said, everything's got to touch everything. So
I mean, it's not even a problem if you like build a smaller system, right? You don't
Right.
necessarily have to hide these things. But for one, I mean, we've been taught encapsulation in like since day one in software engineering, so that it's a good thing. And the other thing, oh my gosh, I lost my thought here. What did you say?
Cohesion, coupling,
Yeah, I
writing in
mean,
software.
the other thing being that as soon as a piece of software grows, then most of the maintainability issues come from the fact that without any kind of governance in a system with, let's say, 200,000, 300,000 lines of code, I don't know, 6, 7K classes, what have you, if everything can relate to everything, that creates this big ball of mud that we all talk about. And because the relationships basically got out of control, and you can only get relationships out of control for elements that you can actually refer to. So hiding the thing just limits the surface of the things that can accidentally connect like across like borders or what have you. And to me, that package scope thing is just a means to reduce the surface of something, so that I don't have to actually manage or govern these elements that I can now hide, because by definition they cannot be accessed. That's kind of the
Right.
yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about Spring Modulith now. We just talked about it in the open. Spring Modulith hit 1.0. Let's kind of start at the top. Like if I went over to start.spring.io, I'm building a web application. I pick web as a dependency. I see Spring Modulith there. I heard Ollie talking about it. He clearly knows what he's talking about when it comes to kind of architecture and organizing your code. What is that giving me out of the box? What is Spring Modulith? What is it there? What problem is it there to solve?
So what it does is, if you think of Spring Boot as something that gives you guidance on like a technical arrangement, or solves technical aspects for you, like configuration properties, dependency management, what have you, think of Spring Modulith as kind of a tool to help you like functionally decomposing your application. So it helps you like setting these boundaries, putting up the fences, because good fences make good neighbors, right? To express these parts in your code base, and then at the same time having an opinion on how you should recombine these parts, because they need to, like the different parts in your application need to work together, and we have an opinion on how this is structured as well, right? So, or how this is supposed to work as well. So that's kind of the highest level picture that I can give you. That is then reflected in a couple of like different things in a logical module model that we kind of establish, and some verification around this, some testing support to bootstrap individual modules in isolation, which is a direct reflection of the requirement. Oh, I want to test a part of my application individually, which lead many teams and people to microservices. And it's also solving a couple of issues that once you decompose your application and you come to the conclusion that, okay, to make them work together, I'm using events, Spring application events, for example, then you kind of getting into the question of consistency boundaries, right? Because they need to stay within the module as well. And then we help you with a bit of infrastructure to solve that problem, solve the consistency issue with the interaction across modules, and testing support is available for that part as well, because we actually recommend asynchronous interaction between the modules, but I'm not sure I'm getting too far ahead here.
No.
But,
No, that's fine. And so we mentioned microservices earlier. Was microservices a lot to do with kind of the inspiration for building this project? Because I gotta imagine, like, obviously there's a place for microservices in architecture. I mean, there's a reason they exist. But there's also been an overuse of them, right? It was the gold rush of architecture. Everybody went and said, let's build everything in microservices, right?
I'm not guilty of that.
Nobody
lived the startup
guilty.
life, proud founder of dozens of failed startups, and never once was it because I was over architecting and I was trying to do all the cool stuff and microservice here and everybody gets a microservice. I never did that.
Yeah. So I'm wondering
conversation.
if this is kind of like pulling, like reining us back in, going, hey, it is okay to build monoliths, but they get complicated. Maybe this monolith, there's something to that, right?
I usually try to think of the architectural decisions as a spectrum, basically, in which you could live. Whereas building a single system only, like a pure monolith, is like one of the extreme ends. and building 1,000 systems is the extreme of in the other end. And
Yep.
actually, even both of these extremes can work depending on the context, right? I mean, we've all heard about Netflix's arrangement with tons of
Death
services,
Star.
what have you. But we're not Netflix, or most companies are not Netflix. In fact, only Netflix is Netflix. So so there is this room in the middle, right, where you define, let's say, a set of 5, 6, 7 deployment units, and then each of those have structure internally as well. So we're not kind of proposing Spring Modulith to be like an opponent of microservices or whatever. It's actually all it does is you build a Spring application, Spring Boot application in particular. It has some internal structure. Spring Modulith will help you to express the structure, control the structure, make sure you're not kind of losing it. Whether this is the only system you build, or whether that system lives in a context with other systems, we totally don't care. Is probably a too strong word, because there's a couple of features coming, especially in 1.1, that help you implementing, especially the scenario where you live inside the context of, let's say, multiple other systems. But we're not kind of trying to be like a counter idea to microservices or what have you.
Right.
In fact, I mean, it's kind of the architectural work is usually you have this logical decomposition that you would want your systems to adhere to, and then whatever kind of physical representation you map this to. I mean, if there's such a thing as physical in software, but that just follows the constraints that your organization, your context has, right? If you have like different separated teams, maybe even not co-located or something, one team in this country, one team in another country, then it might not be a bad idea to build 2 separate systems solely for this reason, right? And the bigger the company gets, the more likely it is that you find such a scenario. If you find yourself in a startup where you have like 3 people building the entire system, it might just make sense that for the very same system, you choose a completely different arrangement, right?
Yeah.
So we're not kind of trying to position ourselves in a black and white scenario here, but just help you with that. Here's my single application, whatever context it lives in, but here's how we help you to structure it. That's the idea, I guess.
Cool. So I guess going back to our Spring Initializer example, I pick web, I pick Spring Modulith, I have this new project. What happens next? Like I start to like I'm starting to break down my application into different domains, right? Maybe your example that you had earlier, like a product or an inventory or an order. And I put these in different packages. So I have a inventory in one, a product in another one. What is Spring Modulith doing behind the scenes to kind of, like you said, it doesn't really care, but what is it doing behind the scenes to help us build these applications?
So I guess a surprising answer might be, by default, it does nothing.
Does not.
So there is this proposed like package structure, which is kind of take the application's root package, and every direct child package is considered the entry point into a logical application module. That's kind of how we look at it. But from at runtime in your application, Spring Modulith like by default it doesn't do anything. And that's the idea is that you could have, for one, we don't want to be as non-invasive as possible to your actual runtime arrangement. That said, what you typically do is that you create a test case that just uses a bit of 2 lines of API, basically, of Spring Modulith, that in a test, you would point it to your Spring Boot application. It from that application class, it would construct the logical model following the package conventions by default, all customizable, but that's what it does. And it would then verify the arrangement structurally. So there's a couple of things built in, that these module packages do not have cyclic dependencies, because architecture
Nice.
101. Cyclic
Yep.
dependencies basically turn two things into one logically.
Yep.
It does a couple of other things in terms of prevents field injection. It's probably one of Josh's favorite as well. That's tiny things that we kind of recommend, basically not forces you, but nudges you to
Best
follow the
practices.
constructor injection guideline, right?
Yep.
For production code, that is. So that's kind of the thing, and the default thing, the kind of the foundation of everything, and it's assuming that you would that you're able to build or encapsulate your modules by just using package scope to hide things within a package. Things get a bit more interesting or more complex if you start to kind of break out of that very simplistic pattern by using sub-packages for the individual modules, because you would want to, let's say, express a layered architecture, onion architecture in sub-packages, because
Yep.
then you find yourself in the position that you need to make certain types public, which makes them public in the overall arrangement. And these very same two lines of code that you've deployed in the first place that we were just checking for cyclic dependencies basically are now verifying that from the outside of a module, you would only refer to the root package of a logical module. So all of the sub packages are basically considered internal. This is kind of a bit of a reflection of we've studied all other module systems that have predated Spring Modulith, like OSGI or what have you, where you need to declare explicit arrangements. Basically, you need to declare a module and then tell the world that, oh, this is a package that's exported and the other packages are not exported. So we just you work with a convention by default that the module's root package, base package, is the only package that is allowed to be referred to by other modules.
Okay.
Again, all customizable. You can expose other types, other packages, basically elevate them to the module API as well. You can craft different sets of APIs that you can actively refer to by other modules. There's basically a giant toolbox of describing this logical architecture within code and using code. But fundamentally, it kind of just allows you to shape a module's surface. That's how I usually phrase it. By which types do you expose, which beans do you
Right.
expose, which events, and all of that kind of stuff.
We did have a question come in that's kind of along this line, so I figured I'd go ahead and ask it real quick. But it says, one of the challenges I face when implementing package by feature is, what do I make public without repeating logic? So I figure you have the same problem within a module, right? Like, what do I make public so that something outside this module can go ahead and access it?
I mean, I guess the question seems to hint at the problem that you, of course, have some abstractions, some code, some base classes that you might have to share between modules, right? And of course, you can declare something like you just have a module that contains these shared classes, and the other modules would refer to that, like the core module. I'm very hesitant to name it explicitly because it often
Yeah.
becomes like a kitchen sink thing. Utils, yeah. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with that per
Yeah.
se. It's just that everything that goes in there would probably have to be vetted twice for whether it really belongs there. But of course, you can have like modules and that are shared, or basically like referred to by many other modules in there. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So, I guess from a package, so package by feature, what advantages do I have from just building out a package by feature? So I come in, I create a new project without Spring Modulith, and I just break down my application into package by feature. I have product, I have orders, I have inventory, I have customers. I kind of just package everything that way. what is Spring Modulith giving me on top of that? Is it a lot of the testing, the reporting, telling me what my modules look like? Am I missing anything there? I guess I'm just trying to get a better idea. That's all.
That's a perfect question. So I guess what I didn't get across really well is that this verification stuff is just one of the things that all of this enables, right? So with those 2 lines of code that basically bootstrap the application module model, we kind of have a like in-memory representation of our arrangement. We parse to verify the dependencies between the modules. We kind of have to analyze the relationships between like the individual classes of those modules. We use a tool called ArcUnit under the covers for that. It's kind of a general purpose architectural description API, basically, for which you can basically select parts of your code base with some criteria API, quote unquote, not the JPA one, God forbid. And then you basically, as a second step, you can define rules of how these individual parts of your application can
That's awesome.
are supposed to relate to each other. And in fact, you can come to the conclusion that the verification aspect of Spring Modulith is kind of a predefined ArcUnit rule, basically, right?
That's great.
The code that is located in this package must only access the code that's in this package. So we get the analysis of all of this and we build up a module model. What we put into this is a bit more of, let's say, Spring specific knowledge. For example, we can identify classes that are returned by @bean methods as being components as well, right? And then we can find references to these types from other modules, and knowing that they establish a module relationship, basically. So there's a bit of Spring specific smarts built into this and detection built into this. And
Awesome.
with that model, we can do a lot of things. One thing that you already hinted at is that we can actually run tests by, like, from that module graph, from that overall module graph, carving out a subgraph, basically, and only include these modules and the components residing in these modules in a test run. So the same way that add_data JPA test carves out an horizontal slice from the application, we can actually now carve out a vertical slice from the application.
Nice.
For Bootstrap in these applications, and in integration tests, basically. And the benefit of that is that because we can constrain the auto configuration, the component scanning to those vertical slices,
Right.
is that, let's say you have a team that implements another module in the very same application, and there's a bug in there that prevents the application context from bootstrapping. That would turn your tests red as well, because if you add Spring Boot test, you try to, or even let's say a data JPA test or what have you, it tries to start the overall thing basically across all the logical modules, and your test would fail if there's something wrong with the other modules. So you basically get test isolation and a much better picture of where things are broken. That's kind of neat, and you can be very specific whether you want to test a particular module in complete isolation, which would mean that you'd have to mock all the outgoing Spring Bean references, or you could basically say, test that module and all the modules that logically depends on, like basically carve out a subtree of the overall graph. That's
really great.
That's the idea. And the second thing that we can derive from the module model, and then we've kind of like concluded on that section, is that, as I said, we find all the Spring components in there. We find all Spring components that are exposed. We know which other Spring components these modules refer to, what configuration properties they expose, what aggregate roots they contain, like what domain events they expose, what domain events they listen to, and we can turn all of this into usable documentation snippets. So for each of the modules, we generate an ASCII doctor table that basically lists all the interesting entry points into that particular
Nice.
module, because we do some kind of like architectural analysis of the code, find the stereotypes, right, that you've used in there, and then can basically just write this into an ASCII doctor table. And what we also do is we create plant UML component diagrams, so that you can see the relationships between the modules of your overall application, both like in a complete view, or with each of the modules as the starting point. Basically, here's a module, and what other modules does that particular one just depend on, and that nicely visualized in a plant UML component or C4 component diagram.
Awesome. So at the
That's
end of
kind
the day, Spring Modulith is helping us write better, more maintainable, more testable code. That's what I'm hearing.
That's correct. I mean, there's this, and the entire basically that's kind of a second chapter really, which is that when you find yourself designing these modules, like from a type point of view, right, with hiding things and
Yep.
exposing things, then you make deliberate decisions that here's, let's say, a Spring Bean I want to expose, and another module comes along and would then be able to call into that other module by just injecting the dependency, the bean, and then calling methods on them. And then you pretty quickly end up at the question of like consistency boundaries. Like, where does, let's say,
Where do you stop?
exactly, I want to complete an order, and that completion is supposed to trigger the inventory update that would then subtract the stock for all of the things that I've ordered. So the question, and because Spring is so centered around the notion of dependency injection,
Yeah.
people's means of letting parts of their application interact with each other is dependency injection. So they literally default to, oh, I inject this thing over there, and then call a method on it, which ultimately, in most cases, makes it part of the overall consistency scheme, really, which is a bit of a problem, because you kind of, your consistency boundaries now all of a sudden span multiple modules,
Yeah.
which might be okay in some cases, but in many cases you're better off with, let's say, event-based propagation of these kinds of things. So let's say in my order example, I would, instead of calling the inventory actively, I would just publish an event saying order completed, and then the inventory reacting to that, which unfortunately by default in Spring is a synchronous call anyway. It's just an indirection, right? The event publication. But there's like means in Spring Modulith to help you realizing this as an asynchronous event publication, which solves the problem. I've just recently written a blog post. Maybe we can link to that in the show notes about the problems with consistency, especially in error scenarios. It's probably getting too much into detail here, but what I'm trying to get to is we're kind of promoting asynchronous event-based interaction between modules. There's a couple of that solves a couple of problems, but at the same time introduces new other problems, for which we then with Spring Modulith provide solutions to both for the runtime execution of your application, as well as like testing slightly becomes different as well, because you're not verifying the interaction with that other thing, but when I trigger the order completion, then I expect a particular event being published, and yada yada yada. So that's kind of there's quite a bit of smarts in that area of the interaction of the just nicely separated modules, but yeah.
And I gotta imagine that a really big feature of kind of going this route is like, at some point you may want to deconstruct a monolith into microservices, and if you have a well architected application and things are separated into modules, that process is going to be a whole lot easier than it would be in the big ball of mud, right?
It definitely is, and this kind of this focus on the event-based integration has like two primary drivers. One is that modules that interact via events are easier to test in isolation, because I don't need the other module, or need to bootstrap the other module. Like, let's say if I want to test the order system and that's actively invoking the inventory, I need to bootstrap or mock the inventory as well, right? If I switch to event-based integration, then I can test the order system by just invoking the method, verifying that an event has been published. So that's kind of like one effect. And the other effect is that we kind of invert the dependency, because like the inventory is now listening to the order module, which if you take this to the, not extreme is probably the wrong word, but if you follow through, if you consistently apply this pattern, you end up with logical modules that you can literally, if you decide I want to take out one of these modules, you basically literally copy the package, you create a new Spring Boot application and move that package over. And there's one thing left that you then have to do, is basically translating or transferring the events from one application into another, which we were going to provide a solution for in Spring Modulith 1.1, where you can, from the events that you have published in your application anyway, let's say the order completion event that previously triggered the local inventory, you can just add an annotation to that event class, and then let's say add a jar that contains the Kafka integration, for example. You would then get that annotated event. It's kind of selected for externalization, as we describe it, right? So for every event publication, we kind of have this list, this publisher then deployed both for Kafka, AMQP, and JMS, I think, are the implementations that we ship out of the box. They would basically find, oh, is this event supposed to be externalized? If so, there's a strategy that you apply, like which topic, queue, or something like that this goes to, and it's transparently published to an external broker, and then can then be listened to by that just extracted other system, right? So it's much easier to eventually decompose the system if the need arises.
Another question, similar thread, but different angle.
Go ahead.
We're in this microservice architecture. We deployed a bunch of things. One of the things that I hear is, hey, when I'm running with Tomcat and I'm deploying a bunch of my microservices to the same Tomcat instance, I get a reduction in footprint. I'm saving on some resources. Could this help me kind of reduce my CPU, my JVM footprint, if I could take a bunch of these 100 microservices and combine them logically, or there's definitely some rules that we'd want around that, but combine them into a Modulith so that I could reduce the number of JVMs that I'm running in production. There's a benefit. Is this something worth exploring for some use cases?
I don't think I would like, if that's your goal, I guess you could look into this. I don't think that it's going to be like it shouldn't be the primary reason to like recompose basically the system into one. What's definitely the case is that the overhead of your Spring Boot like infrastructure, the container, what have you, is of course like minimized by that approach, right? Because you can basically, the same application context now serves like 3 different logical modules. And
this is a conversation that has been the opposite. Hey, how come you're not containerizing your workloads? How come you're still deploying Tomcat and then your WAR files to Tomcat? And this has kind of been a conversation where like, this is the reason. If I could say, hey, you've got those, and typically in that same Tomcat instance is the silo of the org. It's mapped, so they're already doing these things with these are like, and these are related, and they're also doing the same kind of cheat where they all connect to this same Oracle with the multiple schemas, and then we've got the distributed monolith in a different way. So
I mean, if you watch your application landscape or look at your application landscape and you find yourself, okay, this is what we want to do, and you end up doing that and it's a successful thing, then it's kind of that is indicated that you've over split up your system before. Because if you recompose your system into a monolith, and do not feel any kind of organizational problems in terms of like teams stepping on each other's toes or what have you, then it kind of means that you could have done this from the start, right? So it's
I've never
you've
done that.
oversplit the system, which is I I don't want to let this sound negative because I mean there's been this blog post recently about AWS kind of recomposing a couple of things into one system, which then actually was still part of a microservices arrangement, right? They just basically recomposed a couple of systems back into one. So we're all just learning how to like and find out what works and what doesn't. So whenever I like read a blog or what have you about these kind of always change our architecture from this to that, it just means that the teams now know something that
Learning.
they
Yep.
Yeah.
have known before.
Reevaluate your
They
assumptions.
choose let's say to move and to change things, and that's kind of the right thing to do, I guess. It's not that I find out that I could recompose a couple of systems, which means I've been done the wrong thing before. Yeah, maybe you haven't. I don't know, or maybe you have, and it's worth correcting. It's just there's no blame.
It's not, as you said, it's not the wrong thing. You've just learned a couple different ways not to do it, right? And now you've learned a better way to do it. So, okay, I think we're going to start wrapping up soon. I was going to mention this, but somebody in the comments already did. I was going to ask you, but here's a comment. Here's a comment from Lewis. Oliver, when are you going to publish your book on Modulith?
Yeah, sure. And I've been begging for this probably because I postponed the release for quite a few, unfortunately, years right now. Yeah, if I knew, I'd probably speak more loudly about it. It's like 2/3 done. The thing is that it started as a oh yeah, I'm working on this Modulith R&D thing. And here are a couple of other ideas that like are kind of in that located in that area, and then we decided, we make Spring Modulith an experimental project, which means there's some work that needs to go into this, and I need to update the book, and then we make it non-experimental, so there's more work that I need to do, and then of course redo a couple of things in the book. There's some new features coming in Spring Modulith which need to be reflected in the book. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get it done this year anymore, because there's some copy editing that has to go on later on and what have you. But it's
You could just say it's coming soon. I mean, that is relative.
That's been the message that I've been traveling around with like for the last 2 or 3 years, and people seem to get impatient, understandably.
Yes.
So Luis, I unfortunately can't give a better answer, but if you want me to phrase it politely, then it's never been as close as it is right now. So
I like that. Great answer. Cool. So real quick, just to kind of close things out, Ollie, if we wanted to find out more about you, about Spring Modulith, what are some great places to learn about these things on the internet?
I mean, there's the project page, so it's listed on the Spring projects.spring.io. There's a GitHub page, github.com/spring projects /spring-modulith. There's a Twitter, Twix, what is it called these days?
X marks the spot. I don't know.
The bird side. On the bird side, there's an account on which we announce releases. I have an account there as well. Drotbohm, ODROTBOHM, both on the bird side and on Mastodon. That's the best I can think of, really.
I'll also throw in your GitHub repo. Your GitHub account has a bunch of repositories in it, and I know a lot of the talks that you've done are on YouTube. So what we'll try and do is compile the list of resources that you just said, a couple of your recent talks from Spring 1, and I know your GitHub account. We'll see if we can't get those together, put those in the show notes. So if you're listening to this later or watching this replay later, then you can go ahead and check that out. Cool. Sure. Ollie, this has been fun. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for coming on. I gotta imagine we're gonna revisit this conversation in a few months after DaShaun and I can get our hands a little bit dirty and build something real with it. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been
Yep,
Thank you
been
so
no
much
problem.
for joining us. This was super incredible, super powerful. Definitely has wheels spinning, and we've talked about it a lot already. So yeah, hopefully this brings our audience and our community a little bit closer to taking it for a spin.
On a closing note, I think I only mentioned this when we chatted before the show. If you haven't yet, like everyone listening, watching, if you haven't watched the episode with Ted, I think it's the last episode. I've just mentioned to Dan that whenever I think about some architectural topic, and oh no, he's in the audience. Hi,
Ted's
Ted.
always here.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. I was when I listened to that episode, I was like I'm thinking about this stuff quite a lot, and whenever I struggle to find like a nice way to phrase it to explain stuff, then I just hear Ted on the topic, and then it's kind of like, okay, he said it all. I don't need to add anything anymore. So definitely
He
go
is
ahead.
he is literally giving the TED Talks.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, right? That's kind of, gave TED Talks
Cool.
before. It was
So we're looking for Spring Boot 3.2 RC1 comes out on Thursday, and Spring Modulith 1.1 RC1 comes out on Friday.
yeah. So that's
How
probably
much would you love feedback from the RC
good to
version?
close with. We're following we've done the 1.0 release a bit out of band at Spring 1, right? Because there's like attention and we could throw it out. But we're going to join the general release train this November. So Boot RC1 being out on Thursday, Modulith RC1, 1.1 RC1 coming on Friday. And so we're following the GA, and then basically
Cool.
every half a year do these kind of minor releases.
If I'm going to take the RC for a spin on Friday, as soon as it drops, what are the things that you want me to try?
The biggest new feature is indeed the event externalization stuff. So basically, I think we have an example on that in the repo anyway. So yeah, just Spring application events that are published to any kind of broker that you fancy the most these days. That would be the thing.
All right.
Yeah.
And we think
Cool.
we have support for Kafka, APMQ or AQMP, and JMS.
JMS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, Ollie, DaShaun, it's been fun.
so much.
Thank you so much. Can't wait to do this again one day. But until then, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you
Thank you
later.
so much.
Take care, everyone.